evening, everybody. So, walking Wadi Hadramaut, what we need to first of all do is to find out where the Hadramaut is. And many people will be familiar with Yemen being the sort of southern end of the Arabian Peninsula, Oman being just to the northeast of that. Wadi Hadramaut is basically sort of running roughly like that. It's the longest wadi in Arabia. It's about 500 kilometers in length. Arabia being the largest peninsula in the world. And one of the things about the Hadramaut, the kingdom of Hadramaut that gives the wadi its name, is that it's always been quite an ancient part of the world. And certainly the Hadrami people themselves, they consider that they are descendants from Qahtan, who is the 5th generation from Noah. So they consider themselves to be the true Arabs, the real Arabs. Everybody else is Arabized Arabs. They've converted to Arabism, if you could actually say that type of thing. And if we go a little bit closer in to see what we're talking about. Other biblical mentions here are with the Hadramaut Valley itself. Now, one of its other names is Hazar Maveth. Really depends whether you're talking Hebrew or many of the other ancient languages. But as Hazar Maveth in the Bible, in Genesis, it's described as the Valley of Death. And that refers to that translation not only to the very harsh climate that you've got here for people to actually survive in this part of South Arabia, but also the continual state of war that's been going on, even from the very earliest times of even pre-recorded history. The tribes have always been fighting each other over water and over various territories like that. So just to point out Wadi Hadramaut itself, the wadi is formed when there's large amounts of rainfall that you get in the southern end of the Rub al-Khali, the empty quarter. What all this water here, I mean, you might only be talking maybe once a century in antiquity. It seems to be happening a lot more regularly now. But really drenched downfalls of rain of coming downhill. They're forcing their way through this mountain. Now, this mountainside that we've got here runs parallel to the Indian Ocean that we've got here. Different names, but most people within Yemen tend to refer to it as the Jol. That's this sort of great upland area that we've got here. And the wadi's finding is slowly breaking down this mountain to find a way to actually get an outlet to the Indian Ocean. And obviously that has taken many hundreds of thousands of years to actually create that situation. And this is roughly the route that I was following, as best I can indicate it on this. The inspiration for this walk, and I did it in 1995, so we are going back a bit to early recorded history as far as my personal lifetime is concerned. And it was immediately after I'd written this first guidebook that was dedicated to North and South Yemen that were unified. So through the 1980s I led a lot of tours, did a lot of travelling around North Yemen. Pretty much impossible to get into the south. There was the old Soviet system, so in tourist and all that stuff. When East and West Germany came together, North and South Yemen did exactly the same thing for the same reasons, the collapse of the Soviet system. And so I took the opportunity to go into South Yemen very early on and realised there was just hopeless information. There was nothing about any of the sites, any of the places, and that was the inspiration for actually writing the guidebook. But one of the things I never managed to do was to actually get beyond about halfway in that journey, and that was to get to a famous pilgrimage site by the name of Kabra Hood, which is just about here. Getting there was not too much of a problem, continuing was a real problem. And so I never managed to do that before the book, so that was the inspiration for what I wanted to do afterwards. And just to point out, why is this route so important? Well, the Hadramaut kingdom that we've got here, on one side we've got the Mahari Kingdom, and Dhofar that we've got here, and also Sheba on the other side. All of them very important in getting best quality incense and myrrh from this southern Arabian region, particularly Dhofar, the Dhofar region of southern Oman. And so this was a great natural highway, very easy to go along, much easier than actually going through the mountains because it's flat, and we'll see how flat it is when we go there. So just to point out one or two things for people that might not be too familiar. This is just inland from Salalah. These are a couple of frankincense trees, the best quality of the 300 or so types of incense tree that you get. Boswellia sacra. And what you do is you just make a little incision, and you get this whitish yellowish resin that comes out, and it hardens very quickly in these desert conditions. And you can see how the gum tree resins sort of form together in globules, and they're very easy to transport, very light, and also they produce, when they're burnt, they actually produce this amazing aroma. Burnt in the temples of ancient Egypt, the history of that goes back at least 4,000 years, probably a little bit further. Myrrh is a similar plant, it's actually a different genus, Commiphora, that grows in exactly the same regions, that needs this sort of arid desert climate. And that was used in the process of mummification, and also to hide very bad smells during the burials of the pharaohs and the important people otherwise. So this journey that I was doing, I wasn't doing it completely unaided, because I did have a copy of Harold Ingram's Arabia and the Isle. Now, in the mid-1930s, Harold and Doreen Ingrams, who many of you will know of, he was chief political officer, and he tried to instigate what's known as the Ingram's Peace. And it was to try and get the various tribes of South Arabia, particularly the Eastern Aden Protectorate that we were in when the British were based in Aden, to get them to stop fighting. And something that they had always done. And he was pretty successful in the way that it actually did bring the majority of tribes together. And his journey was done by camel, and so he did write quite a few notes, and he did make notice that there was a dry section of about 70 kilometres. So round about here, it's about 70 kilometres, no villages, no water, no wells. And I was a little bit concerned about that, but anyway, never mind, let's keep on. So the idea, start pretty much where the Wadi forms itself out of the desert, a place called Henin. And the reason why I chose Henin was that is where people, earlier travellers coming over the Jol, coming into Wadi Hadramut, people like Freya Stark, Caton Thompson, and Daniel van der Merwen, and von Wiesmann, all of them who had written, about 100 years ago of their travels in the Hadramut. Henin is the place that they started. 3 big towns to go through, Shibam, Sayun, and Tarim. And then it gets a bit wild, and eventually you come into the Mahara region, and I was looking to get out to the Indian Ocean. There is a coastal road, so I started by flying into Sayun. There is an airport at Sayun, and then going back to the starting point. At the end, I needed to take the coastal road to Mukalla, come back over the Jol, and then I could fly out again. That was the basic plan of what I wanted to do. So just like, I'm sure many of you not only have read salmon fishing in the Yemen, but you've probably seen the film as well. So just like the film, it actually starts hovering in space, and then you suddenly zoom in. And what you're zooming into, those are people that know it, you're actually zooming into Wadi Hadramut. Even though all the filming was in Tunisia, you actually zoom into Wadi Hadramut to pretend that it's actually the Hadramut where salmon fishing was going on. This is my starting point. Over on the right-hand side, this is the exit, or the starting point of the Empty Quarter Desert. This is where the waters are sort of funneled in by these eroded mountains that you can see here. And the Wadi starts to form itself from this point. There's Wadi al-Qasr that's coming in from the left-hand side, and that was always the route to get over the Jol to actually come into Wadi Hadramaut as such. And so Freya Stark and Daniel van der Merwe and all those people, when they're writing their books, they always talk about coming into Wadi Hadramaut, and there they're met by the Sheikh of Henin. This is the town of Henin, certainly. I'll say now, but when I say now, it's always talking about the mid-1990s. Not doing particularly good, as you can see. Here they always talked about being well received by the ruling Sheikh, and being well looked after, and then, you know, sort of carrying on the way, great waves, loads of presents that they took with them. Well, me doing this solo, unsupported walk, all I could do really was to turn around and actually start walking myself. Wish myself good luck. I wasn't doing anything that nobody had ever done before. There'd been tens, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people that had walked the full length of Wadi Hadramaut during the trading days. Camels were only ever used for carrying the goods that were being traded. All the merchants and the traders, they would walk. So again, I'm not doing anything unusual in that situation. But certainly as far as Westerners are concerned, it is something that you would have done by camel or you would have done by vehicle. So I was taking this what actually turns out to be a relatively narrow opportunity of being able to do this without encountering too many problems. So this is where the Wadi actually forms itself, and this is the view that I had for the next 3 weeks. And it's quite interesting. The tops of these mountains are almost pretty uniform right the way down to the coast. It's about 1,000 feet, so about 300 meters. The first 300 meters are limestone, the bottom 100 meters is sandstone. And as the deluge of water once every 100 years or so is actually pushed through, it basically sort of erodes all the sandstone at the bottom of the cliffs, and then the upper limestone tumbles down and forms this sort of big ramp. So that is a very typical view of what the Wadi is, pretty much all the way. There's one or two outcrops of volcanic activity, and they do vary it a little bit, but essentially that's what I was looking at for most of the journey that I was doing. And even on that first afternoon, interesting things to come across. This is one of the wandering beekeepers, completely different idea of beekeeping than we would think of in the West. What they do is they're permanently on the move, and they wait until people tell them or they hear that there's actually been rainfall and the flowers are ripe in a particular wadi or a particular parts of Wadi Hadramaut. And historically, they would have packed all the bee hives that they have on the backs of camels. Nowadays, it tends to be with trucks, and also their own accommodation. So just behind the guy's head, you can see this little tent. So that's where he lived. There's about 3 guys that were doing all this. I've never actually tasted any of this honey. It is so expensive. Because it varies on the types of plants and flowers that the bees actually go to. So you can get, very mild honey, and then a few weeks later you can get really spicy honey, depending on what types of plants they've actually been feeding on. And it's pretty much all pre-sold, so that all of this stuff, even a small jar, will cost about $100 US. And it's already pre-sold. They can sell as much as they produce to the wealthy Arabs in the Gulf. This is seen as a very good, pure gift to give from the homeland of Arabia, where a lot of the rest of certainly the Arab Gulfs, trace a lot of their history right the way back here. It might not be written down and it might not be accepted, but generally in the back of most Gulf Arab minds, there's a fact that they do come from this part of the world if you go far enough back. And not for the first time, I actually came to a bit of a halt. I tried to get to Al-Khatam, and I thought, that'd be easy enough. And I just walked through this village of Jawlat al-Mahana, and it was starting to get dark, and I was just about to head into some sand dunes, and the guy in the doorway on the left-hand side, Mohammed, he came up in his little moped and he said, where are you going? I said, Al-Khatam. He said, no, you're not going to make it tonight. My Arabic is not too bad, I can just about get through, but I certainly can't have that much of a detailed conversation. But I did understand that he said, look, come back, do it the next morning, it'll be a lot safer, there's no packs of wild dogs, which you're going to encounter if you carry on at night. So I thought, okay, well that's a good enough reason. Very pleasant to sit on the balcony of his house and while away the evening, and then when it got a bit too cool and the food came out, then we all wandered inside. Just the first time of such great hospitality from the local people. And the first thing was, and this was every time that I met anybody, they said, where's your car? And I said, well, I don't have a car. And they said, and that completely dumbfounded them. Every Westerner, whether tourist or oil worker or politics or whatever, diplomats, they all have cars. And so this really sort of put them on the back step as to, well, what are you doing? The idea of walking. Initially, I said I was walking all the way to the coast. And that aroused suspicions. If I just chose the next town to say that's where I'm walking to, they could just about understand that. So I was always explaining to the locals that I was just walking to the next town. Otherwise, it was getting a little bit too suspicious. So we spent the night with this very kind family that we've got here, carried on the next day. Just such a pleasure to observe daily life going on in the Hadramaut. A local woman going to the fields, presumably to get some fodder for the animals, I would guess, and wearing one of these amazing straw Tengalan hats known as madhalas. Again, quite unique to this part of the world. And through the morning, I did manage to get to Al-Qasim. Al-Qasim, the capital of the Haitis. Some of you might know Sultana Al-Haiti and her Friends of Hadramaut Society. This is the capital that historically they've always had. Quite a modern town nowadays. And even on this first morning, I realised by around 10:30 it was just getting a bit too warm. I deliberately chosen October as the optimum time to do this walk. And yet through the day it was just a little bit too warm. And so this was the first day, and I followed it pretty much every other day to actually hole up in the shade between about 10:30 and about 2:30. So I'd split the day into like 4 or 5 hours walking in the morning, 4 or 5 hours in the afternoon. And of course, at lunchtime when the kids come out of school, it was a real unusual thing to see. Somebody with a bloody great rucksack, the largest that Berg House could actually produce, with all my food and water and everything that I needed for what I didn't know I was, maybe might expect. So obviously great interest to the locals, not just the local people, but also some of the local animals as well. This she-camel, for some reason, seemed particularly interested in me walking down, and her and the 2 little ones followed me for kilometres and kilometres. I don't know, hopefully I didn't take them too much out of the way. I kept trying to send them back, but no, it didn't make any difference whatsoever. By the late afternoon, I'd hoped to actually get to Shibam, this great trading town that we've got in Wadi Hadramaut. And I was taking a shortcut across these fields, but it was a bit boggy because they just irrigated them. And this guy here, he'd done some work in Dubai, so he had a smattering of English. So, we had a bit of a chat. I said where I was going, and he said, oh no, you'll never get to Shibam tonight. He said, come to my family and have a meal and then you can carry on in the morning. I just wish he'd have told me how far his family home was, because we went up this side walking and it must have been about twice the distance had I actually gone on to Shibam. But it was quite interesting talking to him and his family. They were part of the Sayar tribe, and the Sayar tribe are the people who historically they've always lived never in the bed of the Wadi. They've always been way to the north, and these are the Bedouin, these are the bandits, these are the robbers that come in. They're pretty much nomadic, semi-nomadic people historically, and they just come in and raid the more settled people within the Wadi, and then go out with whatever they want to get. It was, I knew that history, but again, kind of hospitality you could not hope to get. Getting up the next morning, coming out to and then turning right around that little spur and coming to the great city of Shibam. Shibam is probably about dates from about 300 AD. Now, there must have been something here before that time, and presumably this has been built on the top of it. 300 AD is quite important because the original capital of Hadramawt was Shabwa, and when the Sabaean kingdom started to fall to pieces, because of the ending of the trade. Lots of reasons why the trade ends, in as much as we get the start of the Silk Road that takes the goods not by sea and through Arabia, but actually overland. We get the rise of Christianity, which stops the whole idea of mummification and burning of incense. I know some aspects of the church still burn incense, but nowhere near as much as the ancient Egyptians used to. And the Romans managed to find a route into the Indian Ocean, and they could understand the winds, so they could bypass this trade by the Arab middlemen. Because they were not only just trading the incense, it was other things, spices and silk coming from the east, ivory, wild animals coming from Africa. So all of those goods were being taken up there. That's why this region was known as Arabia Felix to the Romans, until they realised actually a lot of the other goods actually came not from South Arabia, but from around the rest of the Indian Ocean. So Himyar took over Shabwa, the capital of the Hadramawt, at which point the Hadramis moved further back up the trade route, and this became the capital from about 300 AD, even though, you know, this is a typical style that they've been building in for thousands of years. Shibam means long or tall, and obviously it's the description of the houses. All of these mud-built houses, anything up to 9 stories in height, they look quite it looks very picturesque here, but it belies a very violent history. I mentioned about the tribes always fighting each other. I mentioned about Khatan, where I've just come through, being the capital of the Kaites. Well, the next big place we're going to is Sayoun. That is the capital of the Kathiris. And the Kathiris and the Kaites fought each other for hundreds of years, to the point where this town here used to be separated in the middle. The left half, the nearest bit to Al-Khatan, belonged to the Kaites, and the right half, nearest to Sayoun, belonged to the Kathiris. And they're always trying to, battle each other. So lots of problems to get sorted amongst these tribes. If you go to the edge of the Wadi to actually look down at Shibam, it probably was built on a little island that was in the bed of the Wadi. Otherwise, it doesn't actually make much sense. You can see that pretty much everything else that is built in the Hadramawt is just a few metres up the edge of this scree slope. Whichever bit you're looking at. So when and if it does rain, then they actually miss it all. For whatever reasons, it might have been slightly elevated, but they've always had problems when it does rain, about, especially the water is going from left to right. UNESCO, this is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. UNESCO for decades have always been talking about putting a wall here to deflect the waters away, but as far as I know, that's still never been built. And the Wadi here is about 2 miles across, just to give you an idea, and you'll see how small it actually gets when we get further down towards the sea. Just have a look at this house on the corner that you've got here. One of the problems is that with any mud house, what you need is very good maintenance, and just a little bit of not so ancient history is that in 1967, when the British were forced out of Aden, on 29th of November 67, it was the Soviet-backed forces that came in and took control. So basically what they wanted was Aden port, and they could control the entrance to the Red Sea, hence everything going through the Suez Canal. But during that period of 20 odd years of Soviet rule, from 67 to 1990, then there was no money for investment or for maintenance, stuff like this. A lot of the owners were actually the wealthy people, the wealthy rulers in this part of the world, the sheikhs, the sultans, and they'd all been loyal to the British. That was how it worked. The British set up this buffer state around Aden, the Western Aden Protectorate, we're here in the Eastern Aden Protectorate. And what they did was to basically want, initially, from 1838, when the British came into Aden, was to stop the Ottoman Empire, who controlled North Yemen, from coming towards the south. So put this border around, pay stipends, make the Sultan sort of loyal to the British. And that continued right the way through to 67. And of course, then you get the Soviets coming in, and of course anybody with money, anybody who'd been loyal to the British, they then left, including the Kaiti family, the Kathiris, the Al-Kafs. Anybody that had property, money, anybody who'd been working with the British needed to get out. They were, just in too much danger. And so you had over 20 years when there was no money for maintenance, and sadly, one of the problems of that is that houses were still falling down in the 1990s because they hadn't had that maintenance. If you think you've got cracks in your houses, that is a series. Another 4 stories that are pressing down on this. You sometimes hear about children coming from broken homes. A very tight warren of streets, everybody living on top of everybody else. By the way that they construct these houses, the kitchens tend to be near the top. The reason is if the kitchen is at the bottom, every room above it smells of whatever they've been cooking. And so the kitchens tend to be at the top. And there's a network of sort of little wireways between all the kitchens. So all the women that are up in the kitchens, if they want some ghee or some sugar or something from Mrs. Fatima, it's an awful long way to go down all these steps just across the road to then go up all the steps. So there's a network of little pots on little wires that go between all the various kitchens. So that's one that you've got there that was just clanking its way across from one side of the street to the other. Just one night there, then I continued that shibam in the background, and even after 3 days, I was seriously wondering, have I actually chosen something a bit too hard to do? A lot of these tracks, there was a tarmac road going through the Wadi, but quite often it wasn't going in the direction that I wanted to. And also it wasn't very pleasant just walking by the side of a road that was not busy, but there's a few things that were on it. So I'd always prefer to go along the tracks, but quite often the tracks just went from village to place, and quite often not the direction that I actually wanted. And I realised they were just carrying too much stuff. And the other thing was that when I did go off these tracks, I was actually falling through, sometimes sort of 5 or 6 inches, into this loam, this loess, this silt that has built up over thousands of years. And it's one of the reasons why the Wadi is so fertile, if you can get water to the fields. But also, it's so fine, this soil, this almost like flour-like. And when it does very occasionally rain, and then you get the beating sun, you get this hard coating along the top of it, a hard surface. And so walking on it, you'd actually crack your way through and sink anything up to sort of 5 or 6 inches. And it's actually like walking through crusty snow. It was quite wearing, and I thought, I'm not going to be able to do this for another few hundred kilometres. Still hardly done any distance by this time. So when I was coming through Sayoun, this was a place I'd actually flown into. I just dumped about half of the stuff that I was carrying. I was way too ambitious with what I was carrying. Everything from now will just be from one single lens that I carried with my camera, and a small recording device. You will hear some music in a little while. This is Sayoun. This is the capital of the Kathiri territory. Mud-built houses that you've got here, and as far as I know, certainly the last time I was here, which was in the late 1990s, this was still part of the. It had been taken over when the Soviets came in, and then we had the unification, and so it had become the governorate's museum. The former palace of the Al-Kathiri family. I think it still is. If anybody knows any updates, more than happy to find out what the situation is. Just outside of Sayoun is a small pilgrimage site dedicated to the guy that's buried here. Now, his name is Ibn Isa al-Muhajir, and Al-Muhajir means migrator, and he actually came down from Basra in southern Iraq. And what happens, sort of, once you get the start of Islam, whether that be Shia or Sunni, then you get, and there are quite a lot of Shia in northern Yemen, what you get is particularly holy men, especially if they've led the Hajj pilgrimage. And this guy was leading the Hajj pilgrimage from Basra down towards Mecca. Sometimes they were then invited by the tribes to come into Yemen to actually sort out their problems that have been going on for hundreds of years, under the guise of bringing in the stability of Islam. So this guy comes in, he does set up a sort of stability, but more important than that, he actually introduces Shafi'i Sunni Islam that comes into this part of the world. And he also introduces this really unique within the Arab world class system that you've got. Think of it like an Indian class system. And what he did was to set up this sort of six-layered classification of the people that lived in this area. So at the top there were the Sada, which is the plural of Sayyid. Sayyid is, a very holy person, of which he considered himself to be one. So he was like in the ruling religious classes, traditionally said to be a descendant of the Prophet Muhammad. Whether that's true or not with everybody, it's up to debate. Below that you've got the rulers, so the sheikhs, the sultans. Below that you've got the soldiers, the military class. Below that you've got the tribesmen, well armed, not military, but well armed, ready to defend their tribe against anybody coming in. Below that you've got the townsfolk, maybe the general population. Below that you've got the servants, and then even below that you've got the Subians. And the Subians were the people who traditionally did all the jobs that everybody else despised. Nobody else wanted to do those jobs. And the Subians actually trace their lineage from about the 5th century AD, when Ethiopians, because they all tended to be black-skinned, came over and they tried to take over bits of Yemen. They tried to take over Najran in what is now, used to be part of North Yemen, now part of southern Saudi Arabia, in the name of Christianity. And they were defeated and pushed back. And so so this guy here set up that sort of class system, which is unique within the Hadramawt. What he also did was to put some logical sense into giant graves which dot Wadi Hadramawt and even to the north of that. So for an example, just opposite from here, going up this sort of track that you can see, to the entrance of this other wadi that's coming in there, just about that point, 2 giant graves that we've got here. And it's a good introduction to these giant graves of South Arabia. These belong to Hanzal and Hanzalah. Hanzal, this is this grave that we've got here, 25 metres in length. Hanzalah, his son, that's a bit more broken up and in pieces, but that one is 15 metres in length. Now the idea of these giant tombs, one is in the folklore that we've got, the mythology from history, because this whole area, right the way back to reading the information in Genesis, is that this is the area of the Ad tribe, A-D. And if you read these very ancient religious Jewish texts, actually say it's a race of giants. And what better example would you have of having a race of giants than actually having really extended tombs that you've got like this? But they lived for hundreds of years and they had thousands of children. And it's this mythological sort of historical grouping known as the Ad tribe that the local people can always refer back to, and they can always slot in somehow the known history that they've got somehow into the Ad tribe. Now, what is probably going on here is the length of the tomb is probably an indication of the importance of the person that was buried here. In a lot of cases, actually lost in history as to exactly who is buried in these places. Or it could be there are multiple tombs that are here. That, for whatever reasons, you've got maybe 10 bodies that are buried here, maybe 8 bodies, something like that. As far as I know, again, if anybody knows more than me, these are such holy sites, they will never be allowed to be excavated, but maybe some have. I really don't know. The furthest one to the north was the fabled tomb of Eve, which was in a cemetery just on the outskirts of Jeddah in Saudi Arabia, sadly bulldozed by the Saudis in the 1920s. They really did not like a tomb dedicated to Eve. Wadi Hadramut, the name translates Hazar Mawbeth as the Valley of Death. I didn't have any bad feelings at all. I had very positive feelings coming through, despite this very turbulent, very violent history. To show how the violence goes, then this road that we've got here, that actually came up, this road here, this is a road that is part of the Kathiri road to actually link two of the towns. So from getting from Sayun to Tarim, otherwise, if they stuck to the bed of the Wadi, they'd have to go through Kaiti territory or a federated tribe that was connected with them. And so the only way they could do it was actually create this road going up onto the Jol, down into another Wadi, up another big climb, and then down onto the other side. So it just shows that these things were quite serious problems to the development and the continued partition of bits of the Wadi. This is looking in the other direction, and technically at this point I've actually walked Wadi Hadramut, because at this point Wadi Idim comes in from the south, another big Wadi system, and then Wadi Hadramut sort of goes around a sharp left-hand turn. Once these two Wadis have come together, it changes its name. It becomes the Wadi Masela, meaning the Wadi of Floods. So that was a bit more positive. I was going from the Wadi of Death to the Wadi of Floods, so not quite as dangerous as I thought it might be. Just around the corner is Tarim. This is the big religious centre of Wadi Hadramut. So Sayun is the administrative centre, Shiban is the trading centre, and Sayun is the religious heart of the place, and a real mishmash of different styles of architecture. Because of this continued fighting that the local people have had in the Hadramut, they've always gone overseas to work, certainly over the last sort of 400 or 500 years. Some of them, because they were fighters and very skilled soldiers, they say would make up the bulk of the Nizams or the Rajput rulers in India. Not that far away. They would form the bodyguard. They would form the tribal groupings, the army as such. Some of them are more peaceful, like the Al-Kaf family based in Tarim. They went down to Singapore. They opened the Hotel Europe in Singapore. And all of these Hadramis that went abroad, sometimes they have other families, sometimes they'd be away for 20, 30, 40 years. But the idea was you would always come back and end your life, spend your life in Wadi Hadramut. That was the intention. And during that time, you'd always been sending money back to your family that were living in quite tough conditions here. And the Al-Kaf family became very powerful, and they owned a lot of money. Traded very, very wisely, developed overseas, and so they could build great vast palaces at the end of their time. And this is a right old mixture of Southeast Asian, Indian, Arabian, loads of different styles of architecture that's going on here. One of the Al-Kaf family I travelled around with, and he's one of these rooms that we've got here. He said, that won't make much time to actually sort of replace this ceiling panel. The original idea was to turn it into a hotel. Sadly, South Yemen never became that peaceful to warrant a hotel of this sort of size. It just never got off the ground. One of the descendants of the Al-Kafs had retaken, after the unification, there was a process where you could apply to get the properties back that used to be in your family, and that's what happened with this guest palace that we've got here. Turned into a little hotel, and the guy, I was hoping to get a free room for a couple of nights. I'd walked for about a week at this point, and I thought, okay, well, what I'm going to do, I'm just going to spend a day. I'll get as much information about this waterless section that I was going to do, and I hope he might give me a room. He said, well, last night you slept out, and when you leave here, you'll be sleeping out. So by all means, please sleep on the roof of the hotel. It wasn't quite what I was looking for, but certainly fantastic views. And so my day off, I needed to get some information about this dry 70-kilometre section, and I was advised to speak to a guy by the name of Omar Ahmed Hayden, and he was a goat trader. And so I went down to the goat market, and we managed to find this guy. And he gave me lots of reassuring information that I could do this journey, that I could go on. And so I left in a much better, positive frame of mind. It was only a few days later that everything he told me I realised were complete nonsense. But he did put me in a much better frame of mind. I mentioned it's a big religious centre. This is the Centre for the Religious Studies in Tarim, containing 5,000 volumes of religious interpretations of the hadiths and various religious books that were based here. Some of them coming from the time of when we have those migrators coming in to try to sort out the problems between the tribes. This is a picture of a camel. It might not look it, but if you go 90 degrees to the side, camels are very clever. I only put this in because I thought, is it a purely coincidence that the camel is stood there and I've just come at the time when it's in the total shade, and in a few minutes, as the sun moves around, it'll start coming in the sun again. Absolutely not. After a few minutes, just a little shuffle, and the thing was, perfect. And yet, just a few meters away, you've got donkeys absolutely sweating buckets, and yet there's loads of shade around for them, and got a lot of time. Very clever, these camels. And it was an opportunity to fuel up, carbo load for the next bit of the journey, and I was told there's a real swinging, hot restaurant to go to. I'd have the time of my life once I went there. Nobody to ask about any news or any information. So the next day I did carry on. The further we go, the less and less people, the less and less traffic, the less and less vehicles. The road is sort of down to a cobbled stretch, a lot more sand dunes. And the end of that night, which was the longest day that I'd ever done, or I did on the whole thing because of that day off that I'd had the day before, ended up sleeping on the forecourt of a petrol station that you can see here. And it was only in the morning where I realised I'd actually been sleeping half in and half out of the designated prayer area that we've got here for the travellers. I knew, because I belonged to, before I did the Yemen guidebook, I had belonged to the Association for the British Yemeni Society and the Seminar for Arabian Studies and ASFM, whatever, Foundation for the Study of Arabia. And I did know that I was coming up to an important site by the name of Kibdat Raymond, something like that. It's the French that are actually been doing some excavations up here. They uncovered evidence of a temple that was up here, so pre-Islamic worship up here. Probably an astral triad, so sun, moon, and Venus that they worshipped. But obviously, it was the moon goddess Il-Muha that was the most important. Some of you that will have been to Marib will know the big two temples that we've got in Marib. The capital of Sheba are dedicated both to Il-Muha, the moon goddess. And just around the corner from that, again, something that I was looking forward to seeing. This is Husn al-Ur, and this is on one of these outcrops that are volcanic outcrops that we've got in the bed of the Wadi. Climbed up onto the top to have a look. So rooms divided up. So the soldiers would have been based here. This would have been a big tax collecting site for the camel trains that were coming backwards and forwards. Really, looking at this image that you've got here, that hasn't changed very much over the last 2,000 years. There is a little bit of a road on the left-hand side, but not that much actually on it. And I've been surprised by the amount of traffic that there was going down there. I was expecting a lot less. And so that also made me feel quite good, because I thought, well, if I start on this 70 kilometres drive it, then when I get in need of water, I'll just flag down a truck and they'll give me some water and I can carry on again. What I didn't realise that there's a place called Assom was that almost 90% of the traffic that had been coming past me left the Wadi. It went north, it went up onto the Jol, up onto the plateau, and just did a 2-day blast across the desert to get to the capital of Al-Qaeda. And so it was an opportunity for me to load up again at a restaurant, but I had lost all of these vehicles. The road was in much worse condition as I headed further. 4-wheel drive vehicles now needed. I was more in danger of being knocked down by rampaging goats than anything. The kids ran a mile as soon as they saw me. Is it any wonder that they actually ran away from me? You can see the training that I'd done. I'd done a couple of beach duathlons in Bournemouth for training for this. But what a great joy it was to actually come to a village that had a good water supply coming up from the aquifers. And you know, if I could reach a place like this for a lunchtime or for an evening stop, that was absolutely perfect. And one of the changes since the end of the Soviet system, the old PDRY, the People's Democratic Republic of Yemen, you know, all of the people, all of the money people, the sheikhs, the sultans that had left, you know, none of them wanted to put any money back into the PDRY because it was just going to get wasted, it was just going to get lost. Now that we had unification, a lot of those people were deciding to invest within the unified country. And, you know, I mean, obviously this is the position we can look back in from today and think, well, you know, maybe, I'm not sure whether that was a good idea, but at the time it seemed to be. So lots of new buildings. Every new building has to be associated with the whistle, the ibex horns that you can see to try and keep away the evil spirits. To very you know, superstitious, the Yemeni people, whether it be inside religion or outside of religion. So do the best to bring good wishes into the new mud houses. And again, lots of hospitality. I mean, always an offer if you were near a house and the people were sat out the front of dates and coffee. And this guy had been working in Saudi Arabia, had quite good English, so you know we could have a deeper conversation rather than just the basics of where's your car. So you know, we could actually take it a bit further. Getting to Cabra Hood, this is the furthest that I've been when I was doing the research in a vehicle for my guidebook. Cabra Hood is the tomb of a pre-Islamic messenger of God by the name of Hood. He's probably the guy in the Bible that we know as Ever, but even that is not completely sure. And all of these, the story goes that he was the prophet during the time of the Ad tribe, and he was trying to bring the word of God to the Ad tribe. And there were some infidel horsemen of the Ad tribe who didn't agree with him, and they surrounded him and they were pushing him up against the edge of the Wadi, and Hood prays to God, and as is quite a few legends like this around the Islamic world, God opens up the rock and he can escape with his horse into the rock, and then he closes back again, but it doesn't close completely. There's quite a few places around the Arab world where this same story pops up again. But this is particularly the big belief, and it's a big pilgrimage site for everybody around Wadi Hadramaut. So all of these buildings that you've got here, they only have people in them for about 4 days of the year when it's the pilgrimage day. The rest of the time, 361 days of the year, they're completely empty, which is obviously the time that I'm Cabra Hood, Nabi Hood, Saint Hood, he is so revered. His tomb is 33 metres in length that we've got here. So one of the most respected of the local holy men that are actually buried in the Wadi. I spent the night sleeping on the top of one of these empty houses. I was only surprised, so a week later when I got the photograph back, I appear as a ghost. It's really weird. Now, I don't know enough about my camera to actually create an image like this, but I was very surprised that somehow you can actually look through me at what I'm resting on in the and now these things, I have no idea what these little things are, but they're very spooky, very, very weird. I knew I needed to get into a more positive way of, a lot less vehicles. I'm still worried that I was going too far and then I'd have to turn around and go back, and it's going to be a slog to get back. And I needed to change that mentality. Lots of people walking rather than with vehicles. Again, they say, you know, where's your vehicle? And suddenly, you know, they started to say, well, there's a wedding coming on down the road, which I took with a bit of a pinch of salt. Went through this little town by the name of Senat, and here they have a great tradition of not going out working in Southeast Asia, but actually working in East Africa. And so once they knew that I was English, they brought these old guys that had been out working in Zanzibar or Mombasa or Malindi, places like that, Dar es Salaam, and had much darker features because of that African connection with this area. And what you tend to get is that within an area, people generation after generation go and work in the same place because they've got that family connection. And so even two places relatively close to each other, they might be going, you know, thousands of miles apart, but they've got that tradition of working in that particular place. And then the next morning, this is what turns out to be this wedding. I thought it was a local car boot sale when I got that. But again, people very, very, suspicious as to what I was doing, and they were. But once they sort of got over that suspicion, they welcomed me in. Everybody very, very well armed, which was quite a surprise. You know, these traders, they've controlled all the illegal trade through this part of the world forever. Going back to the times of the Ad tribe. And just going back to this, you know, this vehicle that you've got here is this brand new four-wheel drive vehicle that you can see here. You wonder how on earth, you know, sort of trade-in odds and sods, can these guys afford $100,000 for a new 4x4 like that? Well, of course they can't. They just wait for one to go past, and they relieve the driver and the passengers of the vehicle. And they've been doing that, you know, if it belongs to the government or if it belongs to Canadian Oxy or, you know, whoever, you know, the Total company, French company, were looking for oil around here, and they lost so many vehicles to these guys. Anyway, they're making very good use of them in this Bedouin collection that we've got here. And then there's a little bit of a rumpus, and I thought, oh my goodness, you know, maybe I'm getting kidnapped. That'd be quite interesting. But what they did, they bundled me into a car, and I initially I said, I've got to remain honest to my journey, I've got to walk. But anyway, they did push me into the car, and all they did was to drive me over to the side of the Wadi. What they were doing was to show me these rock paintings that we've got here. Going back X number of years, but at least from the Ingram's description in the 1930s, they've been brought to this site as well. The guys have actually showed them this site, and it has the name of Saad, and that is why the wedding was here, because it's got this great ancient connection from pre-Islam. So some, you know, celebratory location has actually developed through that time. Through the day, they had a chant and response thing. I just played a little example of what they were doing. See what was going on, and I had different people sort of give me access to all the areas of the celebrations. Obviously not the women's section, nobody could, none of the men could go into the women's section. But here's all the camel meat being boiled up for the meal. The pot behind was for the rice. The shop in the background was a shop. It was a shop. A grocer actually come to sell stuff to all the people that were gathered here that otherwise he might not have any opportunity of seeing. But the guy who was doing the best business was the guy selling the bullets, because throughout the day there were shooting competitions, and at one point they were shooting at something across the Wadi, and it was sort of something up here. There's a little sort of shadowy bit, and I saw these tufts of, you know, where they hit. They're never more than 2 or 3 meters away from it. And of course, one of the guys, you know, inevitably thrust a Kalashnikov into my hands and said, "You're a man, you fire." And so I've never held a gun in my life before. And cleverly, he took the whole magazine of bullets out, so if I was some crazy person, at least I could only kill one person as opposed to lots. So I took aim at what I thought they were firing at and fired it. I didn't see any tuff of anything, and neither did anybody else. And if you see where they're pointing, they have no idea where it went. I was a great disappointment to them. You know, Lawrence of Arabia, I ate. And then at night, the bullets transferred into tracer bullets, and it's one of the most amazing things that I've seen. The noise, the music, the celebrations, just absolutely something you just couldn't plan on having. The next day, I carried on to Nisam, which is the start of this dry section. And the guys at the wedding had said, "You cannot go through the dry section, so please don't try." So I walked here. And I tried to hire a camel, no camels for hire, and then the last guy coming through was the shopkeeper. And I had a quick decision to make. Should I jump on the back of the vehicle, because there weren't any camels to hire, and go across the dry section with the idea of coming back and doing it? That's exactly what I did, and on the back of the truck was the guy on the left-hand side, Salem, and he said he had a camel. We came to an agreement. I would pay him £10, 10 sterling a day for 5 days, even though he thought it would only take 4 days, 2 days there and 2 days coming back. But I said, "Look, I'll give you 50 quid for the whole thing." The guy in the red is Mohammed, who loaded up the camel with lots of water. And so we started off straight away, and we walked back towards Nisam. So that I could, in fact, walk through the dry section. And it was great. The camel was carrying all the water, and it could carry my down rucksack as well. So I wasn't carrying anything other than my camera. So evidence that you could do this journey walking without the aid of a camel at some point, if there was standing water like that. Just taking the regular shots, getting a bit sort of fanciful with some of the photos that you can see. We got to Nisam, we had a drink of Fanta, turned around and came back again. And so it took us 3 days to do it. We walked for 25 hours over that 3 days, pretty much 8 hours a day, and we covered 140 kilometres, 70 kilometres there and 70 kilometres coming back. And at which point I hadn't realised that the end of the dry section, it was actually a river that runs all the way down, which did present its other problems of actually getting feet wet. And it was something like 120 river crossings that I had to do in the remaining section to go down. But this was the quietest section, the most unbelievable scenery. Hardly any vehicles, maybe one a day would come past, some rattly old van, maybe 2 or 3 people a day. But occasionally I knew where I was. That little path that's going off on the left-hand side, you can just see a path going up there. The Ingrams mentioned a place called Datta, where if you go out of the Wadi, you can actually take a shortcut over the mountains. But again, wanting to remain true to the journey, I stuck to the bed and kept going around. I got into a routine of 5 hours in the morning, about 4 in the afternoon. This was the shortest ever bit of the Wadi that we've got here. It's only about 100 metres wide, so we got from 2 miles to about 100 metres, something like that. At which point it started to open up again. Again, really remote scenery, just watching the wildlife that was going past. And coming to a little village by the name of Goana, and this guy here, the owner of this little shop here, it's amazing how news travels down somewhere like Wadi Hadramaut. He knew that I'd been at the wedding. He'd been expecting me. He said, "Well, I thought you might have been here yesterday." And he knew that I paid 50 quid for my camel. He said, "That's way too much. I could have done you one for half that price." So he agreed, the next time I'm going to do it, I will get my camel from him. But I did notice a difference in the people. It was only later that I found out that these people that are here, they're more working like slaves for wealthy people along the coast. In this part of far eastern Yemen, than being the owners themselves, and so much less hospitality from the people working the fields, But this guy, very hospitable, and certainly enjoyed spending a bit of money in there for all the things that I hadn't been able to get. And then the equivalent of Huzn al-Ur, this is the other tax collecting outcrop on a volcanic cone that you've got here at the other end. So this is Huzn al-Ad, again the Ad tribe, and so they would control everything that was coming up and down the Wadi at this point. And eventually, as the Wadi is opening up, I get to that coastal road and I thought, oh, thank goodness, I can go up and onto the top and I can hitch a lift back to Makala and get and head my way back. But then I thought, even though it was about midday and I hardly had any water left, I thought there'd always be a nagging doubt that I hadn't actually seen the sea, because I couldn't see where the sea was at this point. And so I thought, well, it can't be that far, so I'll keep walking. So another 2 hours later, I still couldn't see the sea, but I had a sneaking suspicion that those clouds might actually be over the sea. So I went across the other side to an elevated position, and eventually there I could see the Indian Ocean. I thought, well, thank goodness, I can turn around and go back. But there'd always be a nagging doubt that I didn't actually make it all the way to the sea. So I thought, oh, let's just keep going. So there you go. No, I actually made it to the Indian Ocean. You know, that's all quite a long time ago. I just feel so honoured to have received that hospitality, and you know, it's one of the greatest adventures that I've ever done. Seeing things that very few people have the opportunity, and as it turns out, I thought I was trailblazing for maybe, you know, lots of tourists to be able to go and do this same journey. I was basically doing the journey thinking, okay, well that will go into the next edition of the Yemeni guidebook. There's never been a next edition of my Yemeni guidebook, and as we look at Yemen today, you know, we wonder when will the next tourist actually be going into Yemen. It could be quite a number of years off, but you know, I took that little window of opportunity to do that journey, and I feel so privileged to actually have done that. So hopefully that's given you a bit more information about Wadi Hadramut is all about.